4% of $400,000 is $1,333 a month. The average retired worker's Social Security check as of January 2026 is $2,071 a month. Put both of those into the same checking account and the deposit that lands is $3,404. That is the number. Not a projection, not a range, not a planning assumption, with an asterisk. $3,404 a month, $40,848 a year for a single retiree sitting on $400,000. And I want you to notice what your brain did when you heard it. Because $400,000 is the balance that people are quietly embarrassed by. It is the number you do not mention at dinner. It is the number that feels like you got most of the way there and then ran out of runway. Because somewhere along the line, you absorb the idea that the finish line has a 1 and 6 zeros after it. Meanwhile, the account is already producing a monthly deposit that most people would recognize as an income. The threshold you have been walking toward has a specific dollar value attached to it. And if you have $400,000 invested, you have already crossed it without anyone sending you a notification. That figure moves twice before we are done. It goes up for one household type and it gets measured against something uncomfortable in about 4 minutes. But before either of those, look at what happens if you delete one of the two deposits. Take away Social Security and the same household lives on $1,333 a month. That is the whole output of $400,000 of capital that took you 2 or 3 decades to assemble. $1,333. It covers a modest rent in exactly 0 desirable zip codes. It does not cover a year of property tax and homeowners insurance in most of the country. Now put the benefit back and the deposit is 2.6 times larger. Hold that ratio because it is the spine of everything that follows. Of the $3,404, your portfolio supplies 39%. Social Security supplies 61%. The thing you spent your working life building is the minority partner in your own retirement income. The thing you never thought about, the deduction that came off the top of every paycheck and annoyed you for 40 years, is the majority shareholder. Most people have that relationship backwards in their head, and it changes which decisions actually matter. Now, the obvious objection, $3,404 sounds like a gross number. You have been told your entire adult life that the government gets a slice on the way out, that the traditional retirement account is a tax bomb waiting to detonate, that the real check is smaller than the printed check. At this income level, it is not. Here is the arithmetic, and then I will leave it alone. $16,000 comes out of the retirement account and counts as ordinary income. Social Security is different. Only a portion of it becomes taxable, and only once your provisional income clears $25,000 for a single filer. Yours lands at $28,426, which drags about $1,700 of the benefit into the taxable pile. Add it up, and your taxable income before deductions is roughly $17,700. Your standard deduction as a single filer over 65, the base amount plus the add-on you get at that age, is larger than that. You owe nothing. 0 federal income tax. And that result holds even before you touch the temporary $6,000 senior deduction that runs through 2028, which is why I am comfortable stating it flatly rather than hedging it. The gross deposit and the net deposit are the same deposit. $3,404 leaves the Treasury and arrives in your account with nothing shaved off it, which removes the excuse. If the money arrives whole, the only remaining question is whether it is enough. By the way, I built a digital book called The Exit Code that runs this same arithmetic across 50 years of retirement data. Link is in the description. So, is $3,404 enough? The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks what American households actually spend, and for households headed by someone 65 or older, the 2024 figure is $61,432 a year. That is $5,119 a month going out the door. Your combined deposit is $3,404. The gap is $1,715 a month. That number is the entire video, not the balance, not the rate, not the claiming strategy. $1,715 a month is the distance between what lands and what leaves, and every lever we look at from here gets priced against it. And your first instinct is going to be the wrong one, because it is the instinct that got you the $400,000 in the first place. Save more. Close the gap with capital. Let us price that instinct honestly. $1,715 a month is $20,580 a year of additional income at 4%. Generating that income requires $514,500 of additional portfolio, not $400,000. $14,500 on top of the $400,000 you already have. The obvious fix costs more than everything you have accumulated. If your plan for closing this gap is to outsave it, you need to more than double a balance that took you 30 years to build, and you need to do it in whatever working years you have left. That is not a motivational problem. That is an arithmetic verdict, and it means the lever you have been pulling is the wrong size for the job. So we go looking for levers that are actually big enough, and there are exactly two candidates that matter, one of which almost nobody prices correctly. Start with the one the internet argues about constantly, the withdrawal rate itself. Morningstar publishes an annual estimate of what a retiree can pull in year one and keep pulling, inflation adjusted, across a 30-year retirement with a 90% success rate. For 2026, that figure came in at 3.9%, up from 3.7% the year before. Bond yields recovered, so the boring half of the portfolio started carrying weight again. Apply 3.9% to $400,000, and you get $15,600 a year, $1,300 a month. 4% gave you $1,333, 3.9% gives you $1,333. The loudest, most exhausting argument in retirement finance, the one that generates thousands of comments and hundreds of videos and entire consulting relationships, is worth $33 a month against a $2,071 benefit check. The research is good research. It is also, at your balance, a rounding error on your grocery bill. If you are new here, this is the kind of thing I do read the actual research and then check whether it moves your account by a meaningful amount or by $33. Clicking subscribe genuinely helps, so thanks to everyone who does. Now, the version of that research that does move real money, Morningstar tested 8 flexible spending methods against that inflexible base case, and the flexible approaches pushed the starting withdrawal rate as high as 5.7%. On $400,000, that is $22,800 a year, roughly $1,900 a month, which takes the combined deposit to $3,971. That is $567 a month more than the base case. And it is a real increase, not a trick. But you are paying for it with certainty. Flexible means the check changes size. It means foregoing the inflation adjustment after a bad year, or cutting the withdrawal when the portfolio drops through a guardrail. You are trading a fixed deposit for a larger average deposit that occasionally shrinks precisely when you least want it to, which raises the question that the whole 4% conversation exists to answer, and which almost nobody who quotes the rule has ever actually asked. Where did 4% come from, and what was it built to survive? October 1994. A financial planner named William Bengen publishes a paper in the Journal of Financial Planning. He takes every year of American market and inflation data from 1926 forward and runs a brutal exercise. He slides a 30-year retirement window across the entire record: retire in 1929, retire in 1937, retire in 1966 into the worst inflation stretch of the century, and he asks which starting withdrawal rate survived every single window without the portfolio hitting zero. The answer was 4%. Not the average outcome, not the likely outcome, the worst case survivor, which means the number was never a promise about your returns. It was a floor finder, engineered against the ugliest 30 years the data contained. And that is also its expiry date, because 30 years is exactly what Bengen tested. Stretch the window to 45 years and his own arithmetic stops applying. Anyone quoting 4% as a permanent law of nature is quoting a calendar that was never in the study. So the portfolio half of your deposit rests on a rule with a specific shelf life, running through markets that do specific things. And markets do this. The American stock market has repeatedly delivered declines of 20% or more, and those declines do not arrive on a schedule you can plan around. They cluster. They show up in the worst possible sequence and then they refuse to show up for a decade. Across a long record, the market has compounded at roughly 10.2% nominal since 1928, something near 7% after inflation strips its share out. But that 7% is an average of a century, not a description of any particular Tuesday in your retirement. Now hold that against the other line on the bank statement. In a year where your portfolio drops 30%, the $1,333 becomes fragile. The shares you sell to produce it are shares you sell at a discount, and they are not there for the recovery. In that same year, the $2,071 does not move down, not by a dollar. It moves up in the direction of consumer prices, and it keeps arriving on the same Wednesday of the month, regardless of what the market did. 61% of your income is structurally immune to the thing you spend all your energy worrying about. I find that genuinely funny in the way that only financial planning can be funny. The half of your retirement you obsess over, check daily, rebalance, optimize, read filings, about that is the half that can fall. The half you never think about, that you have possibly resented for 4 decades, is the half that cannot, which forces a question I have never once seen a brokerage statement answer. If a check that never falls is that much more valuable than a check that does, what is the check that never falls actually worth? Not what does it pay, what is it worth? As an asset, on a balance sheet, next to the $400,000, here is how you price it. And it is the same arithmetic we have been using all along, run backwards. $2,071 a month is $24,852 a year, adjusted upward for inflation, for as long as you are alive. To produce $24,852 a year from a portfolio at a 4% withdrawal rate, you would need $621,300 of capital. Use Morningstar's 3.9% instead, and the requirement climbs past $637,000. That is not a market price, and nobody will buy it from you. It is the amount of portfolio you would have to hold to buy the same indexed income at the same rate you are using for everything else in your own plan. By your own math, the benefit is worth more than $621,000. So the household that has been describing itself as having $400,000 actually controls over $1 million of retirement income. It has been carrying the larger asset off the books, unmentioned, unvalued, and largely unmanaged. And now every optimization decision you have ever made looks slightly different. You have spent years fine-tuning the 39%, expense ratios, allocation drift, whether to hold international, whether the rate is 4 or 3.9, all of it applied to the smaller half of your income, while the larger half sat there compounding a claim you never once put on a spreadsheet. This is not an argument for saving less. The portfolio has a job, and the job is precise. It exists to close the gap between the index floor and your actual spending. That is its entire function, which means the portfolio does not need to be big enough to fund your retirement. It needs to be big enough to fund the difference. And that is a much smaller, much more achievable target than the one you have been carrying around. So how big is the difference? That depends on something that has nothing to do with your investing skill. It depends on whether there are 2 benefit checks or 1. The Social Security Administration publishes the average for an aged couple with both partners receiving benefits. And for January 2026, that figure is $3,208 a month. Stack it on the identical $400,000 portfolio, and the deposit becomes $4,541 a month, roughly $54,500 a year. Read that second benefit check again. The addition alone, $3,208, is more than twice what the entire $400,000 portfolio produces. A married household did not save more, did not invest better, did not pick a superior fund. It has more than twice the income from the non-portfolio side, and the same nest egg, and a completely different life. Price that couple's benefit the way we price the single one, and it becomes uncomfortable. $38,496 a year of indexed income requires $962,400 of portfolio at 4%, and nearly $990,000 at 3.9. Now set that against the number Americans say they need. Northwestern Mutual's 2026 study found the average American believes it takes $1.46 million to retire comfortably. The couple in this example, the one that thinks it has $400,000 and feels behind, is already holding roughly $962,000 of the asset that produces the safest income in the plan. 2/3 of the number they are ashamed of not having, sitting in the one place they never counted it. But the gap is still a gap. $54,500 against $61,432 of average spending leaves the couple $578 a month short. $578. For the first time in this entire calculation, the shortfall is human-sized. In capital terms, it is $173,400 of additional portfolio. Or it is one permanent reduction in fixed monthly costs, which we will get to, because those two things turn out to cost wildly different amounts. And before anyone assumes the tax result breaks at the higher income, it does not. The couple's provisional income runs about $35,000, which pulls roughly $1,600 of benefit into the taxable pile for a total taxable income under $18,000 against a married standard deduction of $32,200 plus $1,650 per person once they are 65. The whole $4,541 lands, which leaves exactly one variable still moving: spending. And spending is not the fixed wall everyone treats it as. That $61,432 figure is an average across every household 65 and up, and it hides a slope. Households aged 65 to 74 averaged $65,354 in 2024. Households 75 and older averaged $55,834. That is $9,500 a year of difference between the early retirement years and the later ones. These are averages measured across different households in the same year, not one household followed over time. And the pattern is consistent. The travel years cost more than the years after them. For our married couple at $4,541 a month, the shortfall against the 75-plus figure is $112 a month. The gap has an expiry date. It closes on its own without a single decision being made, which is a strange thing for a retirement plan to have, and almost nobody builds it into their thinking. And it explains a finding that otherwise makes no sense. David Blanchett and Michael Finke published research last year in the Financial Planning Review, working from the Health and Retirement Study, looking at what retirees actually withdraw rather than what the models say they may. Among 65-year-olds with at least $100,000 in financial assets, married couples withdrew about 2.1% a year. Single retirees, about 1.9%. On $400,000, 2.1% is roughly $700 a month, not $1,333. These retirees are leaving $633 a month on the table, every month, permission granted and unused. The paper's title says why, and it is the same finding we arrived at from the other direction. Retirees spend lifetime income, not savings. They live on the check that arrives. They treat the portfolio as a balance to protect, rather than a stream to consume, because a balance that goes down feels like a loss, and a check that arrives feels like income. That is a brain problem wearing the costume of prudence, and it costs a decade of experiences. So why does the entire culture around this money point the other way? Why does everyone measure readiness in balance rather than in deposit? Follow the arithmetic of who gets paid. The dominant fee model in American financial advice is a percentage of assets under management, typically 1% a year. On $400,000, that is $4,000 annually. On $1.46 million, it is $14,600. And a Social Security benefit worth $621,000 of equivalent capital generates a fee of exactly nothing, because it is not custodied anywhere and it cannot be managed. The half of your retirement income that is largest and safest is also the half that no one in the industry can bill against. That is not villainy, and I want to be precise about it, because the internet loves a conspiracy, and this is not one. Most advisors are held to genuine standards, and most of them believe they are helping. But no professional model on earth reliably highlights the asset it cannot charge for. And a survey that asks people what number would make them feel comfortable is measuring anxiety, not requirement. Charles Schwab's own participant survey has moved that self-reported figure around by hundreds of thousands of dollars in a few years, which tells you it is a mood, not a calculation. Set it against the ground truth. Census Bureau data puts median American household net worth at $204,900 in 2024 dollars. $400,000 is roughly double that. The number producing the shame is more than 7 times the median household's entire position. A retirement calculator will give you the deposit and stop there. Knowing the deposit and building a system that turns the deposit into a date are 2 different problems. And the second one is where most plans stall. That is why I built the Exit Code, a digital book that takes 50 years of actual retirement data and compresses it into a mathematical framework for leaving the workforce on a specific date rather than a vague someday. 2 pieces of it connect directly to what we have been doing here. The first is the Social Security bridge, how to structure the years before the benefit starts so that the index floor we have been pricing arrives at full size instead of a permanently reduced one. The second is the 4% trap and the dynamic withdrawal method that replaces it, which flexes with what the market actually delivered rather than pretending every year is average. It is 8 chapters of research with no filler, and it costs less than 1 hour with a mediocre financial advisor. Through the link in the description. Every year, you plan against the wrong number, compounds against you. That is arithmetic, not salesmanship. Because there is one decision left, and it is the one you are actually facing. Whether to work another year, price it. Say a strong year of saving adds $25,000 to the nest egg. At 4%, $25,000 of capital produces $1,000 a year of income, $83 a month. That is what a full additional year of your working life buys, expressed as deposit, $83. If you save $50,000, it is $166. The rule is a rate, so take whatever you would actually add in a year, divide it by 25, then divide by 12. That is your extra monthly deposit, and it comes out smaller than you expected every single time. Now take that identical year and spend it differently. Use it to permanently remove $200 a month of fixed costs, refinance something, relocate something, retire a car payment for good, drop the second vehicle. $200 a month is $2,400 a year, which at 4% is the equivalent of $60,000 of capital. And unlike the $60,000, it never has a bad decade, never gets sequenced against you, and never requires a withdrawal rate debate. $83 against $200, both per month, both bought with the same 12 months of your life, which is where your job description changes, and it changes late enough that most people never notice. For 30 years, you were the accumulator. Your contribution was the largest force in your net worth, an effort converted directly into progress. That role is over. Your effort now moves the deposit by $83 a year of work, while the gap responds to a decision you could make in an afternoon. The accumulator's reflexes were correct for the accumulator's problem. They are now the expensive habit, and staying in that role costs you the difference between 83 and 200 compounded across however many more years you spend proving something to a balance that has already done its job. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes, and this is the same principle at the other end of the curve. The work is over, the arithmetic is not. So here is the whole picture on one line. $3,404 a month if you are single, $4,541 if you are married, and both benefits are running. Both figures arrive whole after federal tax, and both halves are indexed the benefit half explicitly by 2.8% this January, which is what added $56 a month to the average check and moved it from $2,015 to $2,071 in the first place. Which brings us to the threshold, and it is the only number in this entire calculation you could not have computed before we priced the benefit. If the benefit is worth $621,300 for a single retiree, then that is also the exact portfolio size at which your investments stop being the junior partner. At $621,300, the portfolio produces the same monthly income the benefit produces. 50-50, below it, Social Security is the majority of your retirement. Above it, your own capital is. For a married couple with 2 benefits, that crossing point is $962,400. $400,000 is 64% of the way to the single threshold and 42% of the way to the married one. Not 64% of the way to retirement, you already have the income. That part is settled. 64% of the way to the point where the thing you built finally outweighs the thing you were enrolled in. That is the real meaning of the $1 million target, by the way. $1 million is roughly the married crossing point, $962,400, where a couple's portfolio stops being outvoted by 2 benefit checks. It is a real threshold. It is not the threshold for having enough, and the two got welded together somewhere along the way. So do this tonight, because it takes 4 minutes. Take your balance, multiply by 0.04, divide by 12. Add your benefit estimate. That is your deposit. Then take what actually left your account last month and subtract. Whatever is left is the only number in your retirement that requires management. If it is negative, you now know it in 2 currencies, capital and monthly cost, and you know which of those 2 is cheaper to move. If it is positive, you have been working for a balance instead of a life, and you have the Blanchett and Finke data telling you exactly how common that is. Subscribe if you want the next one, where the sequencing of which account you pull from first turns out to be worth considerably more than $83 a month. The balance was never the number, the gap is.